Hello, and welcome to Return to Regalia, an Underland Chronicles reread podcast. I'm Una.
And I'm Audie.
Today we'll be covering chapters 23 and 24 of The Curse of the Warmbloods, in which the questers battle the Cutters and unravel the prophecy of blood. What did you think of these chapters, Audie?
These are some of my favorite chapters in not just this book, but the whole series. I think it's such a great reveal and so intense, and it's so good. It's such a great moment in the series.
Yeah, I agree. They're very intense chapters. And Curse of the Warmbloods is your favorite book in the series, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah, so this is like the best of the best for you.
It really is, yes. I was so excited to be on this episode.
Yay, okay, we should dive right in then.
Awesome.
Where we left off, hundreds of red ants were pouring into the field of Starshade. Chapter 23 begins with Ripred barking out orders to everyone. He tells Aurora to take the kids back to the Nibblers and then to Regalia if the rest of them aren't back in 24 hours. Gregor and Luxa don't want to split up with Boots and Aurora, but Ripred reminds them they're about to go into battle, and Aurora is still injured. Gregor asks, "The ants are here for a battle?" And Ripred replies, "Well, they aren't here for a picnic," which is great.
Gotta love Rip Red.
He's so funny. Even in crisis, he's like down to just like make a joke.
Yeah, for real.
Aurora takes off, and Ripred tells Gregor to focus up and figure out what he's going to do for light. Gregor does what he did in Book 2 and tapes flashlights to his and Luke's arms. Ripred gets everyone in formation, then sees that Hamnet is frozen. Ripred tells him, "The cure is at stake. Think of it as a way of redeeming past actions. Think of it as a way of saving your son. Think of it any way you like, but arm yourself or get out." And this is just like great.
Yeah, it's so devastating for Hamnet to have to do this, and that he sees the necessity of it, but is still so reluctant.
Yeah, exactly. And he's really caught off guard and like not ready for this. Because like we saw him kind of jump into action when we first met him at the Arch of Tantalus, because he like did some cool moves to like disarm the guards that Solovet had brought and like keep Mange and Laplood from fighting. But like this is like such a, I don't know, like that at the Arch of Tantalus was just like a tiny little show of force, and Hamnet didn't have to have a sword in his hand. He just like disarmed everyone with some martial arts, basically.
Yeah, and that was a use of force to prevent further violence, whereas he is required to directly participate in the violence, which is the exact thing he's been trying to avoid. That's why he's in the freaking jungle. Yeah, I don't know. It does make me wonder, like, if they had tried a different approach with the ants here, if things would have gone differently. Like, it's hard to believe that it would because they don't really seem intent on stopping. But I mean, we'll see by the end of this. Like, it doesn't work fighting the ants. So I wonder if the Hamnet approach would have been more successful and if it was really just for nothing.
That's a really good thought. I never considered that because I always kind of just believed what Ripred says later in these chapters about how the ants are just like this hive mind colony that don't really like, they don't have a sense of self and you can't interact with them the same way that like you would interact with a crawler, for example. But like we never talk to an ant. We don't know like what's going on inside their heads. So we don't know what we could do to reason with them in this situation. But I agree, it does seem like chances are slim that that would happen.
Yeah, and it was a very like they had to think and act quickly in this situation, but I don't know. It just there's just something so upsetting about it. The fact that Hamnet is forced to fight here and then it doesn't even work.
Yeah, it's extremely tragic that he is in the jungle in the first place to get away from fighting, and then he's forced to fight anyway, and then in the end it doesn't really matter. Yeah, we'll get to that, but
Yeah. Also, Ripred saying, think of it as a way of redeeming past actions. That's like so fucked up.
I was literally about to say that. I was about to mention that part
Yeah.
because like Ripred knows firsthand what Hamnet like needs to be redeemed for, and I think that in a way Ripred is like hinting at his own like connection to the Garden of the Hesperides and how his family died there.
Yeah.
So he's not just saying like Hamnet, like, redeem yourself here. He's saying, like, do me a solid because you kind of were responsible for the death of my family.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. Especially like throughout this whole book, Rip Red has been very understanding of Hamnet and hasn't really had any issue with him at all.
Hmm.
And I was gonna say, like this line, it really just goes to show that Rip Red will, in a moment of crisis or like a crucial moment, he'll say exactly what he needs to say to get people to do what he wants, even if it's not in line with how he's previously been acting towards them.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a really good example of this. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the other thing I was thinking about when you mentioned that, like, was there another way they could have dealt with the ant problem? I was wondering while reading this time around, like, why didn't Aurora take some of the star shade with her when she escaped?
Oh yeah.
But, like, maybe that just wasn't possible the way that they had, like, put it into a big bundle or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, Gregor had time to tape flashlights on his and Luke's arms, so I feel like they could have grabbed some bundles of Starshade, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so that was just something that occurred to me for the first time this time through.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So the Cutters make it a quarter of the way through the field, and Hamnet decides to fight. Temp pipes up that he'll fight too, and Gregor says he should have gone with the kids, but Temp insists on staying. I love this part because, like, Temp is not even mentioned in the chapter until he speaks up, and it's like, oh, I forgot that you were there, and, like, everyone else did too.
Yeah, he's so brave too.
Yeah, I love how he just, like, gets more and more brave throughout the books. He's the
Yeah.
best.
Especially since, like, in the first book, he probably would have just been like, I'll go where the princess goes. But he now is, like, more acting for the bigger picture of things.
Yeah, yeah. I think he understands that, like, saving the princess only, like, it doesn't matter. If the star shade is gone, then the princess is not saved. Like, he
Yeah.
understands the bigger picture. Yeah, like you said.
Yeah. And Boots and Gregor's mom is also, like, currently infected with the plague. So, yeah, I don't know how deeply he's thinking into it, or if it's just, like, his instinct to stay and fight. But either way, it's definitely, you don't think of Temp as a character who, like, grows that much throughout the series, but he really does. And these small moments are really indicative of that.
Yeah, I agree. It's not, like, it's very subtle character growth, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, for sure.
Rip Red gives Temp a position inside a stack of harvested starshade and orders Luxa into the air on Nike. I like that Rip Red gives Temp a job to do, even though he's probably thinking that Temp is, like, pretty useless in this situation.
Yeah.
He, like, recognizes this isn't the time to make fun of the crawlers, like, he's here, we might as well give him a job.
Yeah.
Everyone gets in place, and Gregor is confused until Lapblood tells him to do what Hamnet does. Rip Red reminds them to not save each other, just defend the Starshade at all costs. Then the narration gives us a description of the approaching ants. They're 5 feet long, 2 feet tall, and have mandibles that are shredding the plants as they march shoulder to shoulder like an army. Rip Red tells Gregor to rage if he can because this is life and death, and Gregor realizes it's not just life and death for them, but for the whole Underland too. As the Cutters approach, he draws his sword and feels his Rager mode kicking in. Rip Red gives one last piece of advice about taking off the ants' legs and heads, then springs into battle. And it's really wild because the whole battle only lasts like 2 paragraphs, not even.
Yeah, when I was like taking notes for these chapters, I was like, wait, that's it? It's so short, but it's so like violent all at once.
Yeah, it really makes an impression, and the narration is really good at, like, putting you in Gregor's head, and it describes how he kind of loses sense of his surroundings because he's in Rager mode, and I think that that adds to it. Like, it doesn't need to be described in, like, graphic detail or, like, in long, drawn-out pages. Like, the battle happens, it's 2 paragraphs, and it's over, but, like, I always remember it being a bigger battle.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, like, really good at making that effect with just these 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if I'm just biased because I love these chapters so much, but I just, whenever I think of this book, this is the part that I think of, like having to defend the Starshade from the Cutters. But it's really just so, it's a blip in the grand scheme of things. And I even have a copy of Curse of the Warmbloods that has, like, the cover is the battle with the ants. Like, that's what's on the cover of the book, but it's such a short are such a tiny fraction of the book itself.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, my copy has Frill on the front, even though she
Oh,
only
yeah.
has like 2 lines of dialogue, so
Yeah.
that's what I always think of when I think of Curse of the Warmbloods. I think of Frill.
Yeah, Frill is good.
It just goes to show like how little these things like actually have to be focused on in the text, but like they still make such an impression. Like Frill and the Cutters and like we were talking about Temp's like bravery. Like
Hmm.
we remember these things so vividly, but they're not really like front and center of the story that much.
Yeah. I mean, Frill is a giant lizard. I feel like that's gonna make an impression no matter what.
Yeah, truly. The narration describes Gregor losing sense of everything except his sword slicing through the ants. The cutters keep coming, and eventually Gregor has to fall back until he's right up against the stack of starshade. The ants swarm over him and destroy the harvested starshade in less than a minute. Gregor tries to follow the ants as they devour the rest of the field, but Ripred yanks him back and tells him it's over, they've lost. Luxa and Nike land, and Gregor realizes he and Luxa are both covered in cuts from the ants' mandibles. Ripred points out that the jungle has defeated the cutters for them, and Gregor sees vines ripping them to pieces. When Gregor stands up, he spots Frill's lifeless body among the dead ants. They find Hamnet bleeding from a gaping hole under his rib cage, and when Luxa kneels down next to him, he calls her Judith again, which just breaks my heart every time.
It's so devastating. It's so upsetting.
And even more so that she answers, yes, it is Judith. I am right here.
Yeah, for like an 11, maybe 12 years old by now, for like such this child to have to like she understands that Hamnet needs her to be Judith in that moment, and she just like takes on the persona of her mother to comfort this dying man who's her uncle, who she like just met and just started to form this kinship with. It's just on both sides of things, it's so sad.
Yeah, really.
I think also it's really like the aftermath of the battle that makes it so memorable, I think.
I agree.
Like just the absolute despair, everyone just so I don't know. It's like reading this book. I can't remember when I read it for the first time, but it's one of those things where you're reading it and you're like, oh, but they're not actually gonna like destroy all of the Starshade, right? Then what would they do? But then it happens and it's like, oh no. And it's like you just feel exactly what the characters feel. It's just so shocking and disappointing.
Yeah, I think that out of all of the books so far, this book especially is very good at making you feel what the characters are feeling, and this chapter is just like so hopeless, and you can like feel the weight of that hopelessness. And yeah, like just the despair, and I can picture in my head like perfectly this destroyed field. And I don't picture so much like the actual battle with the cutters when I read, but I can see the aftermath very clearly. Like this is very vivid in my mind, which I think says a lot.
Totally. Also, the part where, like, when Gregor scoops up the last handful of Starshade and it just like dissolves in his hand, it makes me think of, do you know the video of the raccoon trying to wash the cotton candy in the
Yes!
water?
Oh my god!
Equally devastating.
The sheer disappointment. Oh my
Yeah.
god. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. Hamnet's last words are a request to let Hazard be anything but a warrior. Luxa promises, and Hamnet dies. Gregor thinks, like me, oh, let him be anything but me. Which is another, like, amazing, devastating line.
Yeah, truly, it's just, oh my God. I think also the use of the word warrior, I feel like we only really ever hear warrior in these books when it's referring to Gregor as the warrior. So I don't know. I mean, I know like what warrior means in the general sense, obviously, but it's just, I think it's interesting that he's like specifying rather than like soldier or fighter or something.
Yeah, I noticed that too actually. I didn't make a specific note about it, but I did pick up on the fact that he says warrior, and you're right, we don't really refer to the regular soldiers in this series as warriors. It's basically just Gregor who is the warrior. So yeah, the choice of the word warrior specifically is very interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's just to like drive home the point that like Gregor is like his title of being a warrior is not something desirable to him and Hamnet, even though everyone else reveres him for being the warrior.
Yeah, I think Gregor's relationship with being assigned the warrior and the prophecies throughout the books, like in the first book, he doesn't really see it. He doesn't care. He just wants to save his dad. In the second book, I think he's starting to see it more. Like by the end of the second book, he can't really deny his role to play in the Underland, and he's like discovered his rager abilities. So he's starting to lean more into the warrior thing. And then by this book, he's fully like he considers himself the warrior in these prophecies, but he's starting to hate that. And I think it's just a really compelling journey, and just so much has his opinion on his title and of how he feels about that title has gone through so much growth in such a short amount of time for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's this whole arc of the way that he thinks about being the chosen one, and it all kind of culminates at the end of the series with him breaking Sandwich's sword and declaring the warrior dead. And I would love to, like, look at that arc specifically.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Luxa shuts Hamnet's eyes and wipes a spot of blood off his face. Ripred says, "Now cracks a noble heart," and touches his nose to Hamnet's head, which I think is just so tender.
Yeah, it's so sweet. I don't think I've ever fully acknowledged that line before. It's like one of those little details, but it's so sweet. And he really has like so many reasons to resent Hamnet, but he doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had always skipped over the part where he, like, touches his nose to Hamnet's head. Like, that's kind of like he's giving him a kiss on the forehead. Like, that's so tender.
Yeah, like this is the man that killed his family, and he has like nothing but respect and sadness for his passing.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating, Ripred and Hamnet's relationship.
Yeah.
Also, do you think that when he says "now cracks a noble heart," is Ripred talking about his own heart, or does he mean Hamnet?
I don't know. I was trying to figure that out.
Because it would make sense if Ripred was like, "my heart is breaking for this," but it's weird that he would call his own heart noble.
Yeah, that's why I was leaning towards it being about Hamnet, but it still doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah, interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, the message gets across either way. I'm just not sure what the exact message is.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the, like, subject of that sentence is.
Yeah.
Ripred instructs Luxa to take a lock of Hamnet's hair for his parents, and she does so. The chapter ends with the survivors sitting beside Hamnet's body, completely hopeless.
So sad.
Yeah, literally, like, it just, like, weighs so heavily on them, and it translates really well to the reader.
And this chapter, at least like in the copy of it that I'm looking in right now, it's only 4 pages, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it's really short, right?
Yeah, and it's so dense with emotion and action, and so like the entire quest has been leading up to finding the Star Shade, and then in just 4 pages, it's all gone.
Yeah, like, this is kind of the climax of the book, and it happens so fast. Like, Hamnet and Frill are just, like, gone in the blink of an eye, and we don't even witness them, like, being injured. Like, because Gregor is he's off fighting the Cutters too, so he doesn't even, like, see them get injured in a dramatic way like you would think would happen in, like, an action movie or whatever.
Yeah, I would love to know how exactly they died, especially Frill, because again, Frill is a giant lizard. So, I mean, I don't know. I would love to know how Frill got so badly injured that she died. Like Hamnet makes sense, but even then, I would have loved to see what happened exactly.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, like, why the Cutters bothered to keep some of them alive. Like, I guess they just assumed that if they got rid of the Starshade, like, mission accomplished, all the Warmbloods are gonna die eventually. But why wouldn't they, like, if they like killed Hamnet and Frill, why wouldn't they just also kill everyone else there?
Yeah. I don't know. I wondered that too, because it makes sense that they would just be like being on the defensive with the humans, but not like engaging too much unless they absolutely had to, and mostly just worrying about the Starshade. So maybe there's something about Hamnet and Frill where they like put up more of a fight that made them more of a threat. I don't know what that
Mm.
would be, especially with Rip Red there, who can like famously cracks at 400 to 1. So
Yeah, yeah, interesting. But anyway, chapter 24 begins with Gregor finding Nerissa's hand mirror on the ground. He picks it up and is grateful that Boots and Hazard weren't there to see the battle. He asks why the Cutters destroyed the plague cure, and Ripred explains that they hate all the Warmbloods, especially the rats, citing how Solivet has forced the rats up against the ants' borders. I thought that was interesting because Gregor recalls how he heard this from Ripred at the very beginning of the Bane book, where he's having dinner with Solivet and Vicus and Ripred, and they're talking about how, like, the rats are starving and the humans are, like, displacing the rats.
yeah.
And it's interesting that I remember in that scene, Ripred tells Solivet that she'll reap what she sows. And it's like this weird chain reaction of like her displacing the rats and then the rats being up against the ants' borders makes the ants hate the Warmbloods more. And so, like, then they go and destroy the cure, supposedly. And I'm wondering, like, if Solivet had not forced the rats up against the ants' borders, like, would the ants still have this, like, mission to destroy the Starshade?
Yeah. Suzanne Collins planted that seed very early. But then if the ants hadn't come to destroy the Starshade, they probably wouldn't have realized that the plague was like manufactured by the humans.
That's true.
So then I guess Solivet does end up reaping what she sows in that sense, where like she gets totally caught red-handed, but then she doesn't really face many repercussions for that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. Gregor wonders how the ants knew where the cure was, and Ripred thinks the whole Underland probably knew about their quest, because any insect in the jungle could have supplied information about their whereabouts. Temp agrees and adds, hated here the Warmbloods are, hated here. Nike explains that the Warmbloods have the best lands and are perceived as disrespectful toward other creatures. Gregor points out that they are disrespectful, citing how they make fun of the crawlers. He asks if they make fun of the ants too, and Ripred says the ants are different because they don't have a sense of self. The ants only do things to benefit the colony as a whole, which is why they don't mind sending thousands of soldiers to die in hopes of destroying the plague cure. So the Warmbloods don't make fun of the Cutters because they're dangerous. I think this part is so interesting because we learn so little about the Cutters, and this is kind of like it's the most that we learn about them.
Yeah. And I think learning about them through the perspective of the Warmbloods, like Ripred and Nike, who the ants hate so much, like it makes you wonder how much you can trust this perspective, because it's probably definitely is a very biased one. It's very reminiscent of like later in the series when Gregor learns about the term the killers for the humans. And like the sort of like how the humans are they absolutely hate to be referred to in that way. But then like I don't know what with Nike's response here, like when she says that they're thought to be lacking in respect for other creatures, and she just like kind of sighs, like I don't know, it feels remorseful and guilty, but also they just feel very uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because she's like, oh, we're thought to be perceived as, like, whatever. And then Gregor is like, well, you are, though. And the Warmbloods don't seem to be doing much to, like, go against that perception that the non-Warmbloods have of them. It's interesting that, like, Nike seems, like, uncomfortable at the way that the Warmbloods are perceived, but the Warmbloods aren't, like, doing anything to make that better. They're just, like, continuing to make fun of the crawlers and everything else.
Yeah, totally. And then again, Gregor has this like sort of complicated, he comes in with this outside perspective as someone from the overland, so without their like biases from growing up in this world, but he is also like a human and a warmblood by extension, and like he is surrounded by people who have these opinions of the Cutters. So it's sort of this really complicated balance of perspective that he has coming into it.
Yeah. I also like the detail that they don't make fun of the cutters because they're dangerous. Like, they have no problem making fun of the crawlers because the crawlers are not known for their fighting ability, but the cutters are like on a different level from the crawlers because they can fight, which is really
Mm.
interesting. Like, just how valuable the ability to fight is to the Underland. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, also, I don't know too much about this, so I don't want to get like too into it, but I know that like the idea of like in terms of the cutters having little sense of self, I know that in real life, like in our world, I know the idea of like individualism and such is like a very Western ideology. And so I'm
Mm.
wondering if like that bias that's in this book is meant to echo that real life bias in a sense.
Yeah, I like that actually. It is true that like the Warmbloods, because they are a certain way, they like value the, individualism and when they don't recognize that in other creatures, they're like, well, they're like different from us. We can't interact with them the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is actually super interesting that like whether or not it's true that the ants have no sense of self or whatever, like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that the humans kind or like the Warmbloods kind of just like believe that and they think, well, it's useless to try and reason with the ants because they're just blindly loyal to the queen ant and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because like the Warmbloods are also blindly loyal to their own species.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot of hypocrisy among the species.
Yeah, absolutely. Nike asks what they'll do now, and Lapblood suggests they go home and choose a good place to die.
So based, honestly.
Lapblood's honestly really funny sometimes.
She's so good.
Luxa wonders how they could have failed if they did everything the prophecy asked of them. Nike posits that they still don't completely understand the prophecy, and with some prompting, she puts forth the possibility that the cure still exists somewhere else. Ripred doesn't think that's likely, though, because Naviv told them this field was the only cradle, so this was the only cure. Everyone goes silent, and the narration says, Gregor could hear the tinkling of the white flowers and thought how easy it would be to walk into them and never come out.
Jesus Christ, Gregor.
That's
This,
like really dark.
yeah, this poor child. He's thinking of, I mean, like it was kind of funny when Laplet said it,
Yeah,
but he's a child. You can't be thinking these things.
yeah, for real. And it's just like the idea of like walking into the flowers and just the wording of like it would be so easy. Like that's so I don't know, like that's kind of
Yeah.
one of the like more grim lines in these books, I feel like.
Yeah. Gregor, your suicidal ideation is showing. Like,
But yeah, so he's thinking that his mom is going to die, and if Ares isn't dead yet, he'll give up when he finds out Gregor's failed, which is heartbreaking that Gregor is like afraid that Ares will think that he failed.
yeah. And also with his mom, like in the previous two books, he was always so worried about going home to his mom and like Boots being hurt, or even like going back like without his dad, like once he knew that his dad was there. And now his mom is the one in danger and he has to worry about like being able to save her rather than being able to save someone for her.
Yeah, it's wild that he's thinking ahead and he's kind of like spiraling out of control with these like dark thoughts that he's just like, mom's gonna die, everyone's gonna die, Boots and I probably already have the plague, like, we're never gonna get home. And yeah, it's just like, it's really devastating. This is the most hopeless that he's been, like, near the end of any of the books so far.
Yeah. The plague as like the antagonist of this book essentially is really interesting because I feel like with a plague, that's not something that they can solve by fighting like they would with everything else. And then maybe like there would be a more concrete solution. But they're right to feel completely hopeless in this moment because the one thing that they thought could save everybody has just been eliminated. And there's nothing else that they can do. There's really just like sitting ducks in this situation.
Yeah, I really love the idea that like the plague is the antagonist. Because, like, you could say, well, it's, like, the Cutters or it's Solavet, but honestly, most of the time, the protagonists are just, like, working against the jungle, and their goal is to, like, defeat the plague, not defeat, like, a specific creature, or it's, like, much more complicated, and there are many more layers. It's the best.
Yeah, I love it so much.
Yeah, so Gregor doubts, like, whether he and Boots will ever get home and thinks that they're probably infected with the plague. Then Temp speaks up and says, "Not the cradle, unless this be not the cradle." It doesn't make any sense to Gregor, but out of politeness, he asks, "What, Temp?"
I love that he asks out of politeness.
Yeah, he's just like, well, everyone's ignoring Temp, so I might as well, like, ask him what he means, even though it makes no sense and everything's hopeless.
It's like the same energy as when like a little child is talking your ear off and you're just like, oh yeah, uh-huh, okay, sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. The roach repeats himself, and Gregor realizes Temp and Nike could be right. If the Vineyard of Eyes isn't the cradle, the cure could still exist somewhere else. Lapblood says, "But this is the cradle," and Ripred immediately jumps into action, saying, "Who says it is? Some dusty book written by humans years ago?" I love that just Ripred is ready. Like, the moment that even a sliver of hope is there, he, like, puts it to good use and just jumps on it.
Yeah, especially like note with the knowledge that he doesn't actually believe in or care about the prophecies, and he's just like, all right, let's figure this thing out. Like he's whatever it takes to get these people on the move and hoping for survival again, he's ready to do it.
Yeah, this is one of the best scenes to reread, knowing that Ripred doesn't believe in the prophecies, just because he does so much manipulation and, like, is trying to get everyone to think about the prophecies, and, like, he's, like, the next thing that he says about Temp is, like, really funny, too.
Yes.
He issues Temp a real backhanded compliment about how he's been a champ about babysitting but hasn't contributed much else, so this revelation might be why Sandwich put him in the prophecy at all, which is just hilarious to me.
It's so funny. It's really like a certified temp moment or temp line to me. Like, no offense, temp, you've been a real champ about babysitting. That really just says so much.
Yeah, I love that line too. It describes Temp really well. Because every book, literally, he is a champ about babysitting, and it's, like, a necessary job, because Boots is there. Like, he fulfills a very important role. Ripred leads a little brainstorming session then, asking everyone to shout out what they think the prophecy means when it says, "You see the what, but not the when." Lapblood thinks about her pups dying, Nike thinks about the Cutters using the plague to wipe out the Warmbloods, and Luxa blurts, "Not when Ares got it." What she means is, none of them saw when Ares got the plague from the mites on the Bane trip. She wonders how Ares caught it, but not her or Gregor or Aurora. Gregor agrees, thinking it should have been impossible for him not to get the plague, since he was riding on Ares when both of them had open wounds. Ripred asks, if Ares didn't get the plague from the mites, and Howard and Andromeda caught it when they brought him in from his cave to the hospital, where did Ares catch it? This is giving me the vibe of, like, the end of a mystery novel where everyone's in the parlor and the detective is, like, breaking down the whole crime, like...
Yeah. Have you seen the movie Clue?
Yes!
Yeah, like at the end when they're all like running from room to room, like, and this happened here, and then this must happen here.
Yeah. Ripred is definitely the main guy, the butler guy.
Yes.
Yeah, Ripred feels like such a detective in this moment, even though he, like, doesn't believe in the prophecies, so it's, like, another layer of hilarity that he's, like, trying to get everyone to decode the prophecy when he doesn't actually think that there's anything there.
Yeah. Ripper is like the epitome of absolutely bullshitting an essay for a class. Like just pulling something out of his ass to get a good grade.
Luxa says Ares would have tried to find her and Aurora in the labyrinth, or gone to the Flyers' lands or Regalia, but Nike says no one saw him in Regalia or the Bats' lands after the Bane trial. Gregor agrees, saying, he was afraid he'd be executed. He wouldn't even go to the hospital to have his wounds treated. He went... The sight of Hamnet's blood reminds Gregor of something, and suddenly everything clicks into place. He remembers how Neviv let it slip that a container of infected blood and fleas broke months ago before Ares even got sick. Gregor says the reason he, Luxa, and Aurora don't have the plague is because Ares must have caught it when he went to Neviv for medical care and that lab container broke.
I love that when Gregor has this really important revelation, his first instinct is to just go, oh, geez. Like, that's such a Gregor thing to say in this really pivotal moment.
Yeah, I love how he, like, tries to explain all of this, and his, like, thoughts are going faster than his words, and Rip Red is like, what does it mean? And Gregor is, like, trying to explain.
Yeah, Rip Red has, like, a string theory board behind him, and Gregor's like, oh, man, oh, no.
Neviv's nervous behavior makes sense to Gregor now because she was the one who started the plague. Luxa dismisses this, but Ripred points out that if the humans had the cure, they could use the plague as a weapon against the rats. Nike recalls the lines from the prophecy, remedy and wrong entwine, and so they form a single vine. Luxa is still doubtful, so Ripred presses Gregor for more proof. I also like how Rip Red is like, well, if we can't convince Luxa, then we can't convince anyone else in Regalia, so, like, we need more to go off of.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, he's thinking ahead, like, we need to make a case in Regalia for this, and if Luxa isn't convinced, then no one will be.
Yeah, Luxa is, like, their trial run.
Yeah, exactly. Gregor realizes he's still holding Nerissa's hand mirror and thinks about how the prophecy of blood is written backward, so you have to look at your own reflection to read it. This convinces Lapblood that the humans started the plague, but Luxa keeps denying that they would create something so destructive. Ripred repeats the line, turn and turn and turn again, and concludes the chapter by doing Boots' little prophecy dance. He faces the field of Starshade, turns halfway around 3 times, and ends up facing Regalia, which is just one of the plot twists of all time.
Yes, I do remember, like, as a kid, I, like, very faintly, but I do remember just trying so hard to figure out what the repeating stanza in this prophecy meant, and truly just not knowing what the turn and turn and turn again could possibly mean, and for it to be revealed to be so literal, like, so dramatically. It's just such an incredible moment. I really love this prophecy, and the reveal is done, like, so well.
Yeah, it's so good every time. It gets me, like, just the revelation of Gregor thinking back to Neviv's lab, and, like, all of these clues keep just, like, piling up. And then this thing at the end with Boots' little prophecy dance where she, like, turns in a circle is, like, the final piece of the puzzle, and it's just, like, so satisfying to realize that it was in front of their eyes the whole time, and it was so simple, like you said.
Yeah, I love the mental image of Rip Red doing Boots' dance, like just this giant rat spinning in a circle is so funny. Absolutely manic and like losing his mind.
Yeah, like he's so excited that he is like, yes, I can use the prophecy in this way to prove my point, and he's just like making this up though, like that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, maybe like the turn and turn and turn again didn't even have anything to do with like directions. Maybe Rip Red is just like making this connection, and Sandwich is like rolling in his grave, like, no, that's not what I meant. But Rip Red's like, no, I got it, I cracked the code.
Yeah, no, I love Rip Red, just like this whole scene, like we've been talking about it this whole time, but it's just like, it gets me because rereading it, having read the last book, where Gregor kind of questions Rip Red about like, well, you said this when the cure was destroyed, and Rip Red was like, yeah, I had to say something. Like, he's just so good at taking any sliver of hope or like any small clue and like running with it.
Yeah.
And it just makes him such a master manipulator.
Yeah, that's exactly the phrase I was thinking. I was gonna say that.
Yeah, wow. These chapters really were something.
Yeah. Ugh, what a great moment in such a great book.
Yeah, just a great climax of this arc. Like, there's kind of a, like, peak of action with the battle with the cutters, and then there's this, like, lull of hopelessness and, like, grief with Hamnet and thinking about how all hope is lost. And then the rapid build again of like all of the clues falling into place as the whole group together like figures out the prophecy. It's just so well timed and written, and I'm constantly in awe of Suzanne Collins's ability to like hit these story beats like exactly where they need to be.
Yes. And it's such an important moment in like the general thematic shift of the series that this book attempts and accomplishes with this idea that the humans manufactured the plague is like, it totally changes everything we thought we knew. Like there have been these like subtle shifts in the way that we think about the different species in the series so far, but this reveal is just so insane and like really rocks Gregor's whole world and Luke's whole world when they find out that their suspicions are correct. It's just so important to the series as a whole, and it's done so well.
Absolutely. Like, it just totally introduces this whole new angle on things. Like, up until Curse of the Warmbloods, the rats have been the bad guys, and then over the course of the Curse of the Warmbloods, we are getting more and more. We're like preparing ourselves to make the conclusion that the rats are not always the bad guys. And then because that is true, we can also think about the opposite, like the revelation of like the humans can be the bad guys, and where the rest of the series is going to be like this big downhill roller coaster of finding out more and more about the humans. Like this is also setting up the scene you mentioned earlier where they find out that the humans are referred to as killers. Like that has got to be one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. Yeah, it's just great. Like this book has been complicating our views on the rats, and now with this, it's like complicating our views on the humans as well. It's so well done. I can't say it enough.
Yeah. I love it so much. It's
Me too.
it's so great. I don't know. I feel like a broken record. It's just such a great moment. Such a great series of moments.
Truly, I completely agree. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Audie.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything that you'd like to plug at the end here?
Nothing personally, I don't think. I am currently wearing a Return to Regalia t-shirt, though.
Oh my gosh, yay! Is it the Aries and the Flyers shirt?
It's the one with the podcast logo. I possess both shirts now. I kind of have an insane amount of merch.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thanks for being out here promoting the podcast.
Oh, of course. I'm just waiting for someone to ask me what it's in reference to, and then I can just totally overload them with information.
Yes, oh my gosh. I'm hoping that someone will soon ask you, what band is Aries and the Flyers?
That's such a complicated question to answer, but I will rise to the occasion.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, just a quick reminder, I might as well plug it here. You can buy Return to Regalia merch. You can head on over to redbubble.com/people/return to regalia and get yourself an Aries and the Flyers t-shirt or sticker or magnet. All of the cool kids are wearing them. Just ask Audie.
It's true. It's true.
And I designed all of the things myself, and any money that we make from that helps pay for the podcasting hosting service that we use to get our episodes on Spotify and all of the other big platforms. Next week's episode will cover chapters 25 and 26. Thank you for listening, and until next time, fly you high.
Fly you high.